Hello, everyone. Oops. Oh, Bush League. I forgot to turn off the music at that time. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show for tonight. As I quit an application that's popped up on my screen. We are super excited to have everybody here. We are going to be working on the content that I promised for our little break. So let me go with the chat. What's going on, Kingdom FC? I know I've only had the Discord out right now, so I am getting ready to get the links posted for the rest of our social media. So that with hope we'll get our numbers up in a second. But there we go. Try it now. No, the auto link's not cooperating with me. So I have to get X loaded up. Here we go. Go, X, go. To let the people know what we're doing. And we'll get started. See, this is good. This is good that this has happened during the off time. Getting out all that stuff. All right, there we go. So the social is out. We've hit up everybody. Yes, so many matches on as well, so we got some competition, but that's fine because we are also here to just have the general chat. As I promised, we're going to be talking about strategy, approaches to fantasy MLS, and so I've got these fine people here from Discord who are going to be chatting with us. So if you are able to join, thank you so much. If you are with us, please feel free to like and share. It helps so much, and we'll see if we can get a few more people to join, or people who are willing to dual screen during this time, and it should be a lot of fun. So yeah, that's already out there, so we'll just go ahead and jump right in here. Right. Hello and welcome to episode 26 of the MLS Fantasy Insider, our Leagues Cup break discussion on fantasy strategy. This episode is brought to you by the World Cup. Yeah, that's also going on right now, and yes, the games are longer. Brought to you by our amazing MLSFI Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we're able to keep this project going for as long as we have. Be sure to check back to the Patreon the next couple of days to see the voting opening for our 2023 magnet and magnet and pen design. So it should be a lot of fun. I'm your host, Reed Connolly from MLSFantasyBoss.com, and tonight I'm joined by my partner in fantasy, Blaine Riffle, making it back to the show after a bit of a hiatus. We'd also like to welcome our special panel of guests. So we have three of the top players from our exclusive Discord experts chat channel that we have. Yes, that's actually a thing. We have Megan Josh Turner, and then we also have Matthew, who's joining us again, second time on the show this year. Welcome, everyone.
Excited to be here.
They all beat you, Blaine.
Yeah, you didn't ask how we were doing, so I didn't have my good intro.
Well, I said welcome, and I mean that's you've been gone so long that everything is rusty. Ashley is gone. Ashley was actually super mean to us today, everyone. She sent a message on Twitter, and she was like, "I'm so glad that there's no fantasy," and I was like, "Ouch, you're killing me, Ashley. Enjoy your vacation." That's what it was. She was glad that she was on vacation and wasn't stressing about fantasy. So totally get it. That's fine. We are glad she's having fun and look forward to having her back for a discussion next week. So as I previewed last week, we were talking about what kind of content could we have to fill the 3 weeks that we wanted to for this Leagues Cup break, because we still wanted to put out some content. Make sure you all don't fall out of your pattern of checking the streams and everything, but we wanted it to be valuable, and we had some ideas during the show, got some affirmation for those ideas, and people were interested in hearing about fantasy strategy. And so, as I mentioned about an experts channel, we do have an invite only channel on Discord. It's called The Club, and a lot of the people who are in who come to the show are in that group. A lot of people who participate in the MLS Fantasy Insider Invitational are in that group, and it's some of the original core members of the group, some of the constant and frequent contributors and supporters of the show and the platform who are in that group, and some of the very best players, some of the past winners of the game are all in that group. And so Everyone here is a member of that chat, and they're excited to share successes and failures and just general strategy approaches. So I know some of you who are veteran members, I don't know, maybe this is not going to be all new stuff to you, but it could be some affirmations of what you like to do, and just hearing some of the ways different people approach, I think is always valuable. And for you new players to the game, I think this is going to be a great opportunity for you to maybe better understand some of the strategies, or just get a bit of a feel for how you could help evolve your game for the rest of this season or for next year. So I hope you enjoy what we have, but thanks again, everyone, for being able to come. I know we had to shift the days around some, but it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. I got some questions already from the Discord chat. People who join us in chat here on YouTube, you are welcome to post some questions as we're going along, and I will keep checking on those, and so that we can try to work those in as needed, and we'll just kind of more free form round table episode this week. So let's just start with the first general question that really started this all, and I'll let you all introduce yourselves and talk about sort of the fantasy background that you'd like to share, but particularly, what is your approach to how you play the fantasy game, and how's it working out this year, and how's it worked out for you in the past? So I guess it's probably only right to start with our double square up here in the top left with you guys. So Meg, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I'm kind of opposite of my husband. I like to play the differential game. So when I'm looking at prospective players, I usually look at, say, 85% chalk. And then I'll throw like high upside differential on the bench. I have played this way for 9 seasons. The first season was probably my best as far as like hitting on the differentials. This year's kind of been a roller coaster, although I'm still probably highest rank that I've ever had, which is not near what it was like 6-7 weeks ago, but whatever. I've slipped, but it is what it is. So I'm making my way back up. It's just a slow process. But he and I are complete opposites. So you want to comment?
Yeah, I'm all talk. I will take what I learned from this podcast and some of the lineups that I see posted in the Discord, kind of formulate my own kind of conclusion between what I see, and then I do go by X Chaco on Discord now because of it. And yeah, one of our biggest things is whoever we cannot captain the same player. It never pans out for us, so we always have to make sure that our captains do not match. Otherwise, we both regret it deeply.
I feel like that's a fun couple fantasy quirk that right there. Yeah. I'm sure Ashley gets it.
It's really bad when we both want the same captain. So it's a fight to the death to determine who gets that one and then who has to pivot. So
Matthew.
But yeah, that's our strategy, I guess.
This is my 3rd year playing, so maybe I'm still formulating my actual strategy. But I go by Tinkerman in the Discord group chat, and so that's how I play. I like to tinker, whether it's a good idea or not. I think it makes it more fun for me. And so usually how I start is I make my team, or like at least know what I'm going to target, and then look at the chat, and then figure out who I potentially am going to tinker into, so I have a little bit of a plan in my head, so I don't just go willy-nilly, because last year and the year before, I'd go willy-nilly, and there's one game I started Sebastian Blanco last season, he went like 30 minutes, and I got subbed out, injured or something. It was just bad ideas kept happening, so like I have to plan my tinkers so I don't get too crazy, but tinkering is my game for sure.
Blaine.
Yeah, I think I'm a little closer to Meg at this point in my fantasy career. I started out playing a lot more like Josh did, trying to learn the game. Found I don't normally win as much playing that way. Kind of have to go with my gut, tinker when it's nice, but I'm at that point in last year I had one of my best seasons, picking some of those wild ones like Never Vela, just set with your rules, but your gut tells you something, and you go. And I decided with that one specifically, I wasn't going to risk getting burned while everybody else could. And I think people caught on a little bit later, but I started that early, and so I missed a lot of his weaker games by just I could going with the unpredictable there. But now I kind of you've got to grab those few chalk players that are going to have monster weeks. I've missed a few of those guys this year, and it's really hurt. But I tend to look at a few more differentials, a few more players that may not be quite as high on the radar. I go with my gut and watch form. And that's where I'm at now. And if I could pay attention to more of the season this year, I'd probably be doing better than I am. But last year, when I really tried to embrace that, just kind of go with my gut, don't change much unless I see changes on the lineups that I didn't expect. My rating went up higher. I had one of my best years last year because of that. And so I'm very much you take the guys that aren't going to burn you if you don't have them, and then you look for the guys that you think are going to edge out the chalky picks and try to make up ground there.
Pardon me as I'm fixing the chat real quick. There we go. Discord stuff. So what would your percentage be of chalk to maybe differentials there? I know Meg gave us like an 80-20, and Josh, you're like 100 chalk, so no breakdown for you. But what's the breakdown you look for?
It's honestly week to week. I tend to pick my chalk based on who's going to burn me the most if I don't have them. Like Mukhtar with the good home game is a must own, just because if you don't take him and he goes off for 20 points, nobody you pick is going to make up that differential right there. But again, you take a little bit weaker midfielder that a lot of people like. It's a good matchup, but it may be a road matchup. Or Almada's had a few of those where he's been on the road and subbed out. You kind of got to watch your players and do that. But when some of those players start going chalky for a road game, that's when I kind of look away. So it really is pick by pick, but it's going to be who's not going to burn me if I don't have them. I think for the last round, Arango and Bawanga were the two names that came up. They were fairly chalky. I couldn't risk getting burned by them going off with their form, so I slotted both of them on the bench. I would say it's usually about 60% chalk for sure. Just okay. There's a floor of about 60%, especially this season because there's too many good players that are playing really, really well. I did jump off the Espinoza train this year a little bit earlier than a lot of people, just because I saw the consistency starting to dip, and I went somewhere else looking for a few more points. So that worked for me, but I haven't jumped on some of the other chalky players quite soon enough when they've come back around. So I'd say it's usually between about 60 and 80% for me this year. But really, it is just who's going to have that good game that is chalk, and you can't get away from that matchup, so you kind of have to take them to risk. You can't fall behind the pack, and that's the only thing there. You go chalk when you can't help it, but then you try to look at some of the other ones that are comparable and see if you can't steal a few extra points here or there.
So I'm not trying to pass the buck for myself, but while we're on this part of the discussion, what makes a good differential for you also, Meg? What are you looking for when you're trying to identify a differential or differential?
I usually look at if it's a home or away match. I don't usually pick an away differential. I usually try to stick with a home player. I don't bench midfielders very often. Usually I'll play 5 mids outright. Every now and then I'll throw a midfielder on the bench, but usually it has to be matchup fixtures. Form plays a role. Like if I see a streak going on and I'm like, ooh, they got a juicy matchup, that defense is weak, then I'll throw them on the bench. And sometimes it's just straight out gonna roll the dice, and I like this guy, so I'm gonna just see what he does and throw him on the bench and hope it pans out. But that's pretty much, I guess, my 2 cents on it. It's burned me just as much as it's helped me. So there's definitely no rhyme or reason to it. So, I mean, just cruising right along.
Blaine.
Yeah, form and matchup are two of the big ones. If you've got a guy on a hot streak and he's playing against a weaker opponent, I mean, that's really where you start looking at it. That starts bordering on the chalk too. When you see some of that, I like form when I can watch a few more games. This year has been awful. Last year was so much better for it. I actually like looking at tactics and style more than anything to pick my differentials. If you've got an overlapping wingback who loves to get forward, and we've got a bunch of them in this league, playing against a team that likes to play compact in the back or allows a lot more bonus points from that wide play, that's where you start looking at those differentials that you see a guy who everybody knows is probably pretty good and he's right there in the pack with some other ones for your list. But then you look at that matchup and you see 3 or 4 extra bonus points from the style of play, and that's where I really start to shine in finding these guys, and I love to see those players come up. And when you can watch that, you realize what's going on with tactics and which defenses you know to target wingbacks from, which defenses you want to put center backs from. So it is week by week, and some of it is just looking at the chalk and going, I don't like that player this week. I've got a bad gut feeling on this. Who do I think is going to have a better week than that guy? If I see 80% of chat leaning towards one center back and I think they're going to get blown up a little bit and he's not going to see as many blocks and interceptions as he normally would given who they're playing, I'm going to pivot to somebody else. And so I'm going to actually use my differentials to try to steal 3 or 4 points on the field by taking somebody who's going to have a little bit better week and avoid the guys I just don't trust. And they're chalky guys are chalk for a reason, but you can find those matchups to avoid the chalk. And I think half of picking differentials is avoiding the chalk players that are going to be bad as much as it is picking the right chalk players that are going to be good. If you can get an average out of your guy and the other guy and the chalk player comes in below average, you're going to come out ahead more often than not if you identify that every week.
Yeah, and some of this depends on what you're looking at. So looking at overall players or looking at your head-to-head matches. So differentials and chalks are going to vary at different times. And even within the different overall ranking chunks, if you would look at it that way, something that might be a differential if you're in the top 1,000 might not be a differential if you're in the top 100. Things like that. So people, depending on if you're playing conservatively, playing aggressive, right there. For me, I see in chat, Kingdom FC made a comment about reviewing fixtures, building a core team of guys. That lines up with how I tend to approach a team. Is the first thing I always do is I look at the fixtures of the round and just see which games jump out to me as like, yes, that is absolutely what I want to do. Who is on poor form? Who is on garbage? And we'll get into some of these specific questions in a few minutes. And who are the players from there that I like? And so I just kind of go through. I usually start with my midfield and just start picking some of the few players who I'm for sure like. I want this guy. I want a Zella. I want I want a Barrial. I want to have a Bawanga, something like that. And like I'll put together this little skeleton of a team, and then I start kind of looking at my positions and building out from there. Of course, early on in the season, I know a lot of us focus on budget building, and so the strategy does change. I mean, you're looking at who's producing points, what's their 3 to 5 game average. I want to try to build my budget up so that when I get to the 2/3, 1/4, whatever you want to look at part of the season, I just got enough money I can throw out there and start getting in people whenever I want. But I like to look at that sort of core group based on the home and away fixtures as well. That was a good call out, Meg. Just the home game advantage is so real in MLS still, statistically real in MLS, that I'm always looking at that, especially when I'm looking at defenses. I like to look at the home away a lot. I prefer that for the offensive positions as well, but it's something I'm very, very big on with defenses and with keepers. I have a preferred formation as well, and like Meg was saying, five midfielders. I'm a 5 midfield guy, and I'm usually going to be running 3 defenders, and those positions are going to change depending on my switcheroos and autoroos, but it's always 5 midfielders. I'm usually putting at least 2 defenders in my team with some switcheroo options, and then a forward with some switcheroo options in there. So that's a formation that I don't move away from often, because I feel like it has that good balance of maximizing those offensive points versus defensive points. Do you have times when, if you had 5 defenders, that might have been the team of the week? Absolutely. But I think more times than not, it's those offensive players and their production right there. So that tends to be the general approach. I don't have a hard and fast rule for chalk or differentials. There's times, for personally, there's a reason players become chalky, because they usually have a consistency of production. And so if I like the player, if I like the match, if I'm feeling good about it, I'm fine with having a team that's 100% chalk. In fact, a week or 2 ago, that's what I did. I was like, nope, I like all the chalk players. And just one of the straight up things that we can acknowledge at this point is life plays a factor too. And a lot of us who are in the top level right now are the top 100, top 200 type thing. We're looking at lineups when they come out. We're seeing if any of these differentials that we picked up are starting or are in the 18, so that we can make some of those extra tinkers, as Matt would say, as the season builds. And that definitely helps. And that might be more of a hardcore, might be harder for casuals to do, but it's something that is helpful, and the game doesn't make too difficult to be able to do. Our Discord definitely helps that as well, with our lineups feed that you can check out to help with those things. But there are times when I know I can't do that. I'll be busy, I'll be away, I'll be doing something with the family. And so there are times when I do just give me some chalk, have my basic auto ruse set up, and it's just set and forget. And I'll do that depending on what happens. And so, like Blaine was saying, depending on the week really sets it as well. But yeah, my general approach starts with the fixtures, building the core guys, and then from there I start looking at the other resources. One of the specific questions that we got from everyone, hey, Christian, hey, people starting to come in. Again, you guys, feel free to share. Feel free to share this social to get some more people in as people start coming in here. One of the specific questions that we got from our Discord community was, what's your approach to building your first draft team each week? And so I was kind of touching on that already, so I'll finish wrapping up. Like I said, yeah, look at the fixtures, add in some players for my initial. And then I like to build my midfield first, like I was saying, as I kind of start looking at that, I'm looking at their opponent, I'm looking at that form of the opponent. Is anyone called up? Is anybody injured? All sorts of things that we're tracking on Discord as well. And just the general, do they have a new coach? What's going on? I mean, those are things that, depending on the time of the year, could be factors there. What's their home and away rotation looking at for the next few games? Do they have anything with Open Cup? So looking at some of that fixture congestion as well. But I like to build the midfield first. Then I usually start looking at my defense. I like to match up defenders and keepers. And so I usually try to at least have one set right there so I can have a good shot at getting double chances at clean sheets or just some extra bonus points there. I like players that produce bonus points as well. Like Blaine was saying, there are types of defenders that you might like. Do you like wingbacks? Do you like center backs? They have different pros and cons right there. Are you looking for players who are on set pieces? Are you looking for players who are goal dependent? Are you looking for players who are going to be having those assist chances at forwards as a chance right there? So there's some of those little stats I tend to be looking at, but I lean a lot on form for my first draft, and I don't look at chat for my first draft. When I build my first draft, it's just what I think from my initial look, what my gut says, and I make it there. And of course, budget. I will make a team my first draft without looking at my dollars at all. And then once I put the final player in, I'll also throw in at 3 4.0 scrubs, usually after I pick a couple of midfielders. I'll just go ahead and put in my placeholder guys that I'll use Discord to see who's in the game, not in the game, but like some safe, different, who's on a bye, things like that, who's a safe. Oh, and of course, I guess I'll just say now, if there's a double game week, some of this is out the window because you're looking at those double game week teams. But I'll have that set up, and once I finish the first draft, then I look at my budget. It's probably going to be red, and then I have to go there and start, like Matt says, doing some tinkering of, okay, where am I willing to cut at? What can I do to try to get some of this down? At that point, I might start looking at Discord, or some things with chat, or some other, see what other people are kind of throwing out there with ideas to see, is there someone I've forgotten? But that's usually how I take to building the first drafts. Other than Discord, and there's some people who are on there. I mean, I like looking at Ryan's lineup IQ to get information. I of course check out MLS stats. Sort of an older website for MLS Cheat Sheet has some information with bonus points I like to check out there. And I even go to some of the official media documents that MLS publishes. It has more in-depth, it's an MLS Press Box, something like that. It has some more in-depth stats than they have available on their website. It's PDF based though, so it's kind of scrolling through, and that's where you can find some of the stats that I rattle off every now and then on the show about who has taken the most shots, who's conceded the most shots, who's on the win streaks, where they scoring in the first half and scoring in the second half, things like that. So I can find some more in-depth things there. But that's my approach usually for the first draft. Matt's just joined us back after the baby has come. So we're talking about our approach, Matt, to how you build your first draft team each week. I don't know if you want to just jump in and share your thoughts now.
Sure. I usually, like you said, I try not to look at chat right away. And it's Monday morning, so I'm usually at work or something, so can't really go in right away. But I usually figure out which fixtures I want to target first without looking at chat or players, figure out where the clean sheets could be, where the goals could be, and also look at timing and kind of play around with bench. I usually have all my early people on the bench unless it's double game week, and then
That's a great call.
have the bench is just like boom bust players, similar to what Meg was saying, and I have kind of an Otteru going. But look at timing, look at clean sheets, look at potential goals where they're coming from, just sort of fill in my team from there. And then I look at chat and see kind of who people are targeting and stuff like that. I like your shout, Reed, about using kind of extended stats. I know I'm going to say it wrong. It's FBref. They have some extended stats along with a ton of leagues, but specifically I use it for MLS, looking at shot creation actions, kind of more progressions for midfielders and stuff like that. That I like to look at depending on opponents and kind of figure out. I don't usually get this deep, and then I overthink it and it goes terribly. But like certain teams give up more free kicks than others. So who's the free kick taker for this team, or which team likes to give up a lot of corners? Who's the corner or kick taker for this team? And the classic one that we've seen a lot this season that Samurai Panda in Discord has pointed out many times is Portland gives up a ton of corners and free kicks, and so picking their free kick taker against them is like a must. We've seen that with Reynoso is a great example, who picked up a 9 without any goal contributions against Portland. I think it was a 9. I could be pulling that out my butt too, but usually that's how I at least go about it. I usually just kind of figure it out and let it flesh itself out from there. And again, kind of pick out which fixtures I would want to target for tinkering on either game day as fixtures come out or as the week goes on, sort of thing.
What about you guys? Meg?
So I was kind of reading in the chat, and Black and Red suggested always trying to stack a goalkeeper and a defender. Mm-hmm. And I do that most of the time with an early game, so I can throw that on the bench, and if it hits, great. If not, I've got pivot points. But I too do the exact same thing that both of you have already mentioned. I usually try to build my team early before looking into the chat. I also try to have it done before the podcast comes out, and I kind of use that as a baseline. Like, yeah, I like that they're talking about this player. I already have them in my team. Or you might throw a suggestion out there that maybe I haven't looked at, and then I can go and kind of compare who I have in that spot with the player that you suggested. But other than that, pretty much kind of start with the general and pivot if I need to, depending on lineups. I do that a lot. I know Reed was talking about like looking when someone lines up with a certain position. If I feel like for example Wiley, when he's not playing defender, sometimes he's worth a gamble on the bench. That's pretty much on point with both of you.
Josh.
It's bad, really. It's more the same. Like I know I did say earlier that I take from the Discord and from this podcast to build a team, but I do always start with my own little template and then run from there. I always do the 5 midfields as well. I don't know how to put a midfielder on my bench. I don't know. It just doesn't work for some reason. But I will sometimes just go with straight up with a scrub forward and then run my 2 playable forwards on the bench and then run with that. And obviously, if neither one of them hit, having that pivot to upgrade that scrub to a actual playable forward sometimes works out. But if I'm going to go for my differentials, that is very rare when I don't go chalk. They're always going to be on the bench. I can't put a differential in my lineup at all for some reason.
That's the safest approach. Absolutely.
Yep. So,
Blaine.
And I always use that MLS cheat sheet that you mentioned. I've been using that forever. I don't even remember how I found it. I'm sure it's through the Discord, but those BP points probably more than I should, and I'll always choose that over. So.
Y'all talk a lot more about statistics than I do. Like, I'm still learning that aspect of the game, so I'm not as statistic backed as when I throw a player out there as a suggestion. It's not usually because I have the statistics to back it up. It's more or less a gut feeling, a hunch. And usually I'll disclaim that. So it doesn't come back to bite me if they're like, oh, I shouldn't have listened to you. Well, yeah, roll with it.
Blaine?
Yeah, I'm a matchups first type of guy. I go identify those, and first people it'll be in my roster. If I find a game that's a 3 of, I will go ahead and get those 3 in my roster right away. Sort by the team and just go grab the 3 I want from that game. And there have been times this year where it's like, no, I'm taking 3 from this team. Get them first. But after identifying those like super juicy matchups that you just have to have, I usually just sort by price and start adding in the most expensive players that have a favorable matchup, not just go top of the list down. But you just kind of start there. Your best players are going to bubble up in price towards the top. See where my budget's at after I completely fill up my team, and then start pruning from there to get under budget if I need to. Sometimes you come in under budget doing it that way, and it's all great. Other times you've got to actually drop a premium midfielder that you didn't really want to down to a little bit more of a differential, or see about sacrificing a forward, running an extra defender, just whatever it takes to get you under budget and where you can cut some money. Now, I may be one of the weird ones here. I run 4 midfielders with a midfielder on the bench almost every week.
You are.
I am a 3 defender, 2 scrubs purist on that. I think you do better getting your attacking players on the bench. I tend to run a few more high-risk guys. I like having my 2 forwards on the bench. And I find it easier to pivot to a defender later in the week than trying to find a different attacking player later on. So if my entire bench fails, I would rather bring in a couple of late defenders to try to salvage some points for a week, because if my entire bench fails, I'm probably not having a great round anyway, and picking up defenders with what's left is going to be the best way I can to salvage what's already a bad week. I get the 5 midfielders thing, but I also hate having to run a bench defender that I want to come in. I just feel like it limits your Aru potential to have just that extra slot tied up for a defender in the back. It's never worked for me. I've never liked it. But I tend to play a little bit more high risk, high reward. I want to see those bench scores. I want to get my Arus in place. And I want to be able to maximize my offensive potential. And I found running 3 defenders with 2 scrubs allows me to maximize my offensive potential. But I prefer forwards, honestly. I understand midfielders are your bread and butter. They're going to get you the points. But by the time I get to that 5th midfielder, unless it's one of those crazy weeks where there are 5 premium midfielders that you have to have, I find when you start looking a little bit deeper, I would rather risk taking a couple of forwards trying to get a couple of goals to beat out that fifth midfielder on my lineup. I think it's more potential points that way. That's just the way I've always played it, and I can't get it out of my head to play it that way. But I also like two scrub defenders just because it's cheap, it's easy, and I don't feel like I'm sacrificing a forward position or something where there are a lot more points on the table up front.
And this is a good transition because our next question is about how do we balance, and I just modified it based on a question from Black and Red in chat. How do we balance stats versus form versus player price? And I like this transition because you touched on the reason for five midfields, Blaine. I'm a five midfields person myself because when you're looking at what players are generating fantasy points, the midfielders have the best chance of generating those points. Out of position, defenders can be up there, but the midfielders have the best chance with getting defensive points to an extent. They have the best chance of getting offensive points. They're usually in the best positions for assists while still being offensive threats, which is why we talk about who is on set pieces or who's on PKs and things like that. And for me, I find it preferable to, I may have four midfielders and then a whole big laundry list of question marks for the fifth one, but that's when I can go to the stats. I can be looking at who's generating offensive points, who's generating defensive bonus points, who's on form, who has a good matchup. And to me, that's where I would prefer to have a fifth midfielder on the field who has a good shot at getting those points versus a forward, which, as longtime listeners of this show know, I rarely ever captain, and it's because I tend to prefer those offensive midfielders in general. And so for me, some of the favorite stats that I like to look at is bonus points. I love looking at bonus points because that's showing you who is actually getting involved in point producing actions. And so I like to, if I'm able to discern between offensive and defensive bonus points, that's something that I like to do if I can, because when I'm looking at defenders, I'm either going to want to have a big center back who is just generating all kinds of defensive bonus points, or I'm going to want to have a wing back who is frequently getting to be a goal threat, to be an assist threat, or is generating some sort of other offensive points up there with the chances created or any kind of that. I want to particularly highlight keepers at this point too, because as I've often said, that position has just the smallest variance between pricing of the player and their ultimate points. The majority of points that every keeper will earn is going to be from simply being in the game. They're going to get 2 points for playing 90 minutes, and they're likely going to get at least one or two other bonus points there. So I don't tend to have a huge priority on expensive keepers as like, oh, that guy's definitely better. I would much rather, the one stat year to year that I always see that actually makes the most difference in keepers is ball recoveries. You can't depend on clean sheets. You can't depend on blocking PK shots or anything like that. It's ball recoveries that tends to set some of the higher producing keepers apart. And it's kind of a ridiculous stat to even try to track. And so I tend to just look at fixtures and the form of a team. And I'm like, this is what I feel good. And I'll try to do the pairing with defenders. But I like looking at bonus points. I like looking at, again, just like I think a lot of us will talk about players who contribute to the team. So who's on set pieces, who's going to be on PKs, and who's out of position, who's getting forward. Like those are some of the things I like. I'm not a big XG person. I don't know if that's sacrilegious. XG, XA, great stuff. Soccer Analysis puts out all kinds of great things as well. But I tend to look a bit more, maybe it's the eye test, is I'll look at players and I'll just see what's your, let's just get this out of the air. After like points last week, most of the stats in the game aren't really useful. 3-week average, 5-week average can help you some at the beginning of the season when we're looking at maybe who might go up and down. But once you get there, I find the in-game stats to be pretty lacking in usefulness. So you're going to be, I do like to open the player view window though, and just look and see like, oh, this guy's gotten a goal and assist in at least 3 of his last 5 games. I like that. That sounds good. Oh, and he's got a great matchup. I'm feeling all right. Let's keep this guy on my watch list. So I'll look at some of those sorts of stats, and then bonus points is some of the go-tos that I have. What about you, Blaine? Stats, form, points, or stats, form, price. That's what we're looking at here.
I'm a huge one on form. And it goes both ways. You want to know who's in form and who's playing really well and which teams are clicking as a team. Team form matters more than player form to me most of the time as well. And you flip that though, negative team form is also a huge factor in when you're picking these guys. Montreal to start the season was getting absolutely shelled by everyone they played. You were betting against that defense all the time. It didn't matter who was playing them. You were taking somebody from the opposing team because the Montreal just started off just that bad.
Oh no, we lost Meg.
Yeah, we did. Hopefully they get back in. But player form is a little bit of it. Once you find out which teams are playing well, then you look at who the hot player is for that individual team, or if it's a group of players, you start identifying from there. Stats to me are more of a tiebreaker as I'm looking at differentials. I agree with you, Reed. I love going into that player screen and just looking, scrolling down and seeing their points over the last few games. I tend to sort by 3-week average just to see who's got the highest 3-week average, and then I go look at how they did it over those games in their player window. If they've got a double-digit average, but you look in there and they've got a 18-point game because they had a hat trick, and then everything else is a 2 or a 3. Okay, they've got one outlier that's really bringing their average up. Not a guy you can rely on. If I start seeing an average in the 8s over the last games, and they're only managing an assist every other game, and they're still putting up 8s, that's getting into Carlos Heel territory for bonus point production. That's a guy that's playing well. That's when I start looking at stats, is who's getting the points without the goals and the assists, and it's really easy to see in the player window, looking at those bonus points. But stats are kind of secondary to the eye test on that, and really it's team test, and then it's players from those teams, because MLS is a very streaky league. You're always going to get burned every so often with somebody who is playing really well. Polito in the last round, he had been on a goal-scoring tear, and then he puts up a 5 in a double game week. It happens. But more often than not, if you take a guy like that, you're going to get better results. And thankfully, I had 2 other forwards that gave me solid results for the round, because that's what I was looking at. I was looking at teams that play well. And so, yeah, teams are my number one priority. I want to identify the best teams, and then I kind of break it down from there depending on what I'm looking at. If I'm looking at individuals from the same team to put against each other and see who I'm taking, or if I'm looking for my differential, I start looking deeper into stats when all the form, team form, everything looks about the same. Then it's who's giving me the most with the least amount of big contributions, because that's where you can get your bread and butter points. Like midfielders, always picking up those bonus points. If you got a forward that's getting bonus points versus a boom or bust forward, that's your tiebreaker right there. You take the bonus points because you may get a 4 or a 5 compared to a 7 with a goal. But if your guy gets a goal or an assist, he's right up there at that 7 or 9. So you're happy with those couple of bonus points and a little bit less. It's just mitigating risk and stuff like that. But team form overall is my number one deciding factor.
And I want to call it a good conversation going on in our YouTube chat right now, where Black and Red made the comment about parity in MLS having an impact on how important form is, and Christian weighed in saying that what he values about form is you look at the actions, and that if players are on form, then that's likely going to help the other players on their team. They're going to be getting around them. They're going to be getting the ball. They're going to be getting into good scoring positions. So that's the value of form, and I think that's a good shout out to make as we're talking about that. So, Matt, for you, stats, form, price.
Form as well for me. I like to look at stats to help kind of guide stuff, especially not to divert it, but especially looking at drafts, because I also play in the drafts. league to kind of, if I can predict when a player is going to do well, I can snag them really quick. I think we all play draft except for Reed here, but mostly for sorry to our own little club, but mostly for FMLS, the classic game. I just look at form, except for Polito. For some reason, I ignored his form and missed out on all his chances, except I took his 5 this week. I stranded him on my bench, but it was fine. But yeah, there's got to, and as Christian was saying, there's a reason for that form, so you can figure out the reason for that form, whether it's the teams they play let up a lot of points to strikers, or if people are getting better around that person, or if that person just suddenly found, like Polito, his scoring issues, or is finally healthy in a system that really works for him. Figure out that reason, or just kind of, if someone's doing well, these are like the exciting tinkers I have. If someone's doing really well and suddenly this matchup looks good, it's a great bench play if it's an early game. And so if someone's form is great, I'll definitely consider throwing them on the bench, as long, and I don't know if we've talked about differentials or chalk picks yet, as long as that's not going to take away from a really strong chalk pick that could hurt me against other players and their picks as well.
Oh, we'll get to that. Don't worry.
Oh, good.
Josh, what about you and Meg?
You want to go?
You can go first. You start talking.
I mean, I don't consider price pretty much at all. I think this far into the season, price doesn't even come up in my thought process. I'm going to look more towards probably stats, just because I know that's where my BPs and stuff are going to come from, is getting those kind of stats and whatnot. So I'll lean towards that over price for sure. And form, I mean, if they're on form, they're generating points. So that's another thing that just adds to the repertoire.
I definitely look more at form. When the player's hot, taking them. I'm also not big on looking at price point at this moment. And as I mentioned earlier, stats is not my jam yet. I'm learning, but anywho, I'm more of a form person as well.
And I think that the key thing, and this was mentioned in chat as well, the key thing about prices, it can give you a false sense that because this player costs more, he must be better, and that is just simply not always true. There's often a reason for the points, but you can see the players how they fluctuate with their production. That's not always going to hold true, and lots of times those cheaper players will often be the differentials because they don't have a solid history. There's also a penalty to the prices. We've all seen the price of Messi, and to an extent, even though some will debate if it is or isn't high enough. Blaine, tune in next week to see more about that. There is sort of a penalty for, you expect someone to be good, so you're going to be expected to have to pay more for them. And if they're not, their price will go down. So that's how our game works. Definitely honorable shout out to weather. I don't factor that in a lot. Weather and travel. I'm going to put both of those things in here. Weather and travel. I don't factor those in a lot into travel more than weather. I never really think about weather until I see something's delayed and I'm like, dang it. But I will think if it's like, oh, Orlando's going to Vancouver, well, that's going to be awful. So there's so, and I will try to look at a few fixtures ahead and see what the schedule looks like, and that may help me think about some of that. But one thing I want to stress right now too is, as you're going through your own process and looking through the teams, don't be afraid to make that first lineup, look and see what people are mentioning and talking about, and then just start plugging things in. Like, you don't have to save. You can always go back and go to what you had, see how it looks, so you like it. I did all the time during the show is Blaine will mention somebody, a guest will mention somebody, Ashley will mention somebody, and I might switch up a few players on my team, which means my budget might be different, so I got to look at a couple other guys I might have thought of, and I'll just think, do I like that? Do I like that better than I had before? And so, like, don't be afraid to do that. There's the tinkering again, but just see how it looks and think through it, and so don't be afraid to do that, because it just how you see it, be like, yeah, I do like that. I do like that. This is my number one, or do I want to go with the center back? Do I want to go with the, what's that chance? So, like, play around with your team and see some of that as you're going through this process with your teams. And I think that's a nice way to sort of think about the balance, and then you can start filtering through the stats as you go through from there. We've mentioned a few times scrubs, and so I saw a couple of references about this in general conversation on Discord. And again, this is often a big topic at the beginning of the season, and for newer players, it's harder to. But specifically about scrub players, what are they? When I'll do the what part. What are they? When to use them? How many to use? And at which positions do you put them? The bonus question was, would you ever scrub a mid? And I think we've already touched that. Well, maybe not scrub a mid. We've talked about benching a mid, but so you're welcome to do that. But for the clarity of this conversation, anyone listening, a scrub player is normally a cheap as can be player for that position. So we're usually looking at 4.0, 4.5 here, who is, if possible, guaranteed not to play, because that is the player, or those are the players who you will use to activate any of the switcheroos and autoroos, which we'll talk about next. And so that is when you would use them, is when you're wanting to try to maximize points coming off your bench, or potentially maximizing points for a future player that you might add into your team if you don't like what your bench is offering you. How many is definitely subject to, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you all say is your go-to how many. For me, it's 2. Pretty much every week, like I said, I'm going to have 5 midfields. I'm going to have 3 defenders, one of which on my field will be a scrub, and I'm going to have 2 forwards, one of which on the field will be a scrub. And then I'm going to have 3 players on my bench who are very likely going to play, and I hope are going to do very well, so that I will get, that'll be 2 defenders and 1 forward, and I will get the best 2 of that lot. And depending on when they play and then how it's all set up, I would still, if I have budget, have the option to actually add in another player to replace my scrub if need be. So for me, that answer pretty much every week is going to be 2, and I may even, that gives me the ability to use 1 as a keeperoo if need be. So that's when 3 might come in for me, as if I'm using a keeperoo. But for my field, it's pretty much 2 scrubs each week, 1 at defender and 1 at forward. So let's go with Josh, you and Meg this time.
For me, I mentioned earlier that sometimes I'll just do the 1 scrub forward and throw 2 of my starting forwards on the bench. I'll do that from time to time. If I do that, obviously, I'm going to run 3 scrubs because I want 2 defenders in my lineup. And I'm basically relying completely on my bench at that point. And then obviously I can pivot from there if I need to move away from any of those scrubs. And then, yeah, I guess that's all I have.
And I always do at least 2 defender scrubs as well. Sometimes I'll run a 4 scrub, but I do kind of like, I already know the player I'm going to pivot to if my bench doesn't hit. So usually if it's a late game and I'm watching lineups, I'll go ahead and slot my backup player into my lineup. And then if my bench hits, I go and scrub them out. But other than that, I always run 2. Like I said, sometimes I'll run 3 depending on, I guess, how I have my team stacked at that particular week. But always 2.
Sometimes one of my biggest fears is when I'm starting someone at a forward position, is I'm always worried if I have that other starting forward on my bench. I'm always afraid that I'm going to not take the bench points, play the guy that I put in my lineup, and he doesn't get as much as my bench play got. So it's always one of those inner demons that I battle with when I'm trying to play the scrub or not play the scrub or whatnot.
Matt.
I always start 4-5-1 on the field with 1 defender as a scrub. And so I have 3 defenders starting, 5 midfielders, 1 forward, and then a defender and 2 forwards on the bench. All those people on the bench early games, and so that scrub there can is always going to bring in one of those people. And if for some reason all my bench fails, I can like move budget around if I need to. But and then I can start picking away at some of the later players if and adding more scrubs. But I always start with 1, unless it's a double game week, a large one. Then I start with I do a 5-4-1. No, 5-4-2. Is that math? It's summer. I don't know.
No, that's 12 people. That's 12 people.
There you go. So it's a a 5-4.
No, you're right.
Yeah,
That works.
so
That works.
yeah,
That works.
yeah. There we go. Okay, 5-4-1. And with 2 defender scrubs, 4 midfielders, and 1 forward starting, and that way it's just kind of, I don't want to overthink it. It's just an auto route. So my 2 automatically throughout the week, my 2 best people on the bench come on the field, and they can fight out for the points. And that way but I scrub a defender first, unless I get really excited about some defender matchups, and then I scrub a forward. But I'm not entirely against scrubbing a mid. I know that is blasphemy to some to hear. I scrubbed a mid earlier this year, which worked out in my favor, but that's like a last resort thing, where if I really want a matchup going for a defender or a forward, or if I'm out of options, then I scrub the midfielder.
Blaine?
Yeah, I'm the double defender scrub most weeks. It works. I like it. I kind of talked about it earlier. I like getting the points from those frontline players. I think the attacking players are better. Scrubbing a midfielder or scrubbing a forward, having a scrub forward on your lineup, you're leaving potential points on the table. Forwards can outscore a defender so easily. That said, when I get away from that, it usually is like that 4-5-1 that Matt was talking about. 1 defender, 1 forward as my scrubs. Or honestly, if I'm really looking at that, I like to put just a scrub forward in my lineup with 2 guys on the bench and let those 2 forwards kind of auto fight it out for that spot. And if they both play well, I've got the option of one of them coming in for the defender. Like if I don't see a third forward, that's when I'm most likely to put a scrub forward in and play another defender and just try to pick up some extra points there. On that random topic, will you ever scrub out a midfielder and not see their points late in the week? Yeah, absolutely. There have been times where Buanga's played one of the later games and you absolutely want him in that late game. You left him on the field just because you wanted to see all of your other options first. But I think there was one time early in the season, it was down a late game between Buanga and Evander, and I took Evander out of my lineup to let Buanga's points come in and see what he would get. Now, early in the season, Evander wasn't playing as well, and it was one of those weird matchups where he was just starting to come into form. But yeah, I will definitely scrub a midfielder if the matchup on the other positions is right.
So the final closing thing I'll mention for here is I agree with chat that you probably want to at least plan on having 1 scrub in your team, but you don't have to start with scrubs. I mean, we all mentioned teams that start with scrubs. With especially the Apple TV era of lineups, you have some stacks of when games are going to be, and if you have a good split over Saturday, Sunday games, or even Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday, that's probably double game week, and that's, again, different ball game for double game weeks. But if you have a good stack of games, you can always have players on your bench playing before the players on your field, and that just lets you preview those points. And so if you don't start scrubs, you still have players on your field who will play. You have the ability to remove them from your field to force a scrub, and it's going to be a way for you to maximize those points. So just keep that in mind as when we're talking about this. You don't have to start with scrubs, and so that's where maybe saying plan for 1, because you may have a full team, but you might want to drop a guy to bring someone off the bench later on. And then the general consensus, at least from Christian and Black and Red in chat, is that the 4-5-1 and the 3-5-2 are the most versatile formations for you to use if you're planning on using some of these scrubs. As Christian says, he believes the 3-5-2 prioritizes a forward scrub and gives you another opportunity to get one of those bang or bust offensive players in there. So, and I would agree. I do think the 3-5-2 is probably a bit more of a set and forget team. So you have your bench set up. You're going to get two of the higher players on your bench. You can just stop and go from there. So, but it is also very important to, if you have the ability, save money in your bank, because you do always have the option to upgrade a scrub if you do not like the player who would be coming off your bench, and have another shot at getting a few more points right there, which could be the difference. If you listen regularly and you hear our head-to-head results, could be a point or two, could be the difference between success and failure at any time. So it's very important to mention. But this leads us next is switcheroos and auto-roos, and it's definitely an advanced approach that I can proudly say that members of this community and this podcast specifically developed. They pioneered this community pioneered the switcheroo and the auto-roo, and we directly impacted this game because vice captains used to also be in MLS, except with our staggered starts. You could do what used to be called the caparoo, and you could actually force your captain to be a scrub who did not play if you wanted to preview your vice captain's points first, to force them to be your captain and thus get the double points there. So imagine that. It was amazing. It happened for 1 year, and I think good old Ben Jada was like, no, you all broke the game. Might have been Ben, but I think it might have been Ben Bear, but I think it was Ben Jada. But yes, so that was there. The switcheroo is a manipulation of the players in the field. And you guys, if you feel like I missed something out, please chime in after this. But the switcheroo is a manipulation of the players on the field. You have a player on your field who's going to play. You like the player on your bench better, so you switch out a player on your field for a scrub, thus forcing the change and the bringing in of the player off your bench. The auto-roo is very similar, except it just does it for you automatically. You have a scrub already in your field. It is the default of what the game does, and you have just set up your bench to automatically put in who you want to be better. You have the ability to not, as I said before, not do that and change your scrub so you don't force the auto-roo, but that's the switcheroo and the auto-roo at its heart. The other part is the keeper-roo, which is just the switcheroo, the auto-roo, but with your keeper, which you have far fewer options for that, and it's usually pretty easy to do, and so most people are running keeper-roos each week to have at least 2 shots at getting a clean sheet right there. But that's the switcheroo and the auto-roo. I don't think I've done a video for a couple of years about it. We have it at the MLS Fantasy Boss Discord channel. It's like I said, a couple years old, but it's still relevant. But I will try to do a better one, or at least an updated one next year with other lineups. But anything else you guys want to add about switcheroos? Do you have a preference for you guys of what you use? Anyone can chime in here.
For me, I like to use the auto-roo on double game weeks. I
for
really
sure.
like to do it. I don't really use it any other time though. So I did in previous seasons, but I haven't this year.
Yeah, the auto-roo has gotten more popular this year a little bit with MLS on Apple. With all the kickoff times being the same, it's a whole lot harder to see and make those manual switches. So if you're looking at a lot more late game players, you're going a lot more with auto-roo and just putting a couple of those guys on your bench and taking the best score you get. If you're going heavy on the first game or on the first time slot, you're typically going more switcheroo setup. You've got it where you can either, and see, I look at it the other way too. It's you can either have guys in your starting lineup that you take out because you want to keep your bench score, or you can preview your bench score and realize if you need to panic swap out a scrub for somebody better. I tend to use that latter version a lot more. I assume my bench is going to do what I want to do, so I play a little bit more auto-roo style, and then I use my scrubs as emergency replaceable players if I need to go find more points. And that's always the way I've played it. Really, though, I think if we're going to talk about this, if you have the budget for your players that you want, and then some, you want to be leaning more towards the switcheroo style, loading your early games up and saving that budget so you can make adjustments as you see the scores. Either have your targets in mind, being ready to take them out. If you do not have the budget, and early in the season we talk about this too, auto-roos tend to be a little bit better. You put all of your money into, what is it? We get 13 field players, 10 plus 3 subs. So you put all of your money into, those 11 or 12 guys, those first few guys, put 2 scrubs out there and take the best off the bench. You use your money a little bit more efficiently on high-end players, or you maximize the points for the budget you're spending by doing that and seeing all those scores. But you lose the ability to tweak, and if you get a bad bench score, you get 3 bad bench scores, you're stuck with those coming in. But I think auto roos are a little bit more money friendly in this game until money doesn't matter anymore.
That's true, and you can still do the auto roos with this Apple lineup, but because games tend to start late and stoppage time, things go longer than expected, you do always have that chance that you might miss something. You can't preview it fully, and so you might have to pull the trigger on something before maybe you've seen those final minutes of stoppage time. So it can be difficult, but yeah, so is fantasy is a harsh mistress. All right, so the last question that I have for you guys tonight prepared, you're welcome to mention anything else after this, and we'll check with chat as well, we've talked about differentials and when to choose that, but this is sort of the other way of the other side of form. When you're seeing a player or you're seeing a team on poor form, what's that trigger for you? What do you have to see in a player to be like, no, I like you, but not right now? And what do you have to see in a team to be like, you're hot garbage, I want to bet against you? Like, where's that tipping point for you all, Matt?
I think it's still fixture related. So even if a team is being hot garbage, like right now, I guess a good example is Atlanta's defense is just terrible. Obviously messy, but still they're hot garbage. But still, if it depends on who they're playing. If they're attacking players, if there's someone I can say this person's going to benefit from that person, even if they're or that team, even if they are in poor form, I want them at least on my bench, especially if they're in the early game where I can bench them and go with that. But really, I think I'll only take someone who is in poor form and who might be getting better only if I've watched the games before and they've showed signs of just having a few bad games or missing shots that they usually put in, or if it's a rivalry game and they're going to have a little extra step and will want to score more, not necessarily will never want to score, but the rivalry game kind of adds that to it, or if it's an early game and I want to throw them on my bench. But typically I wait until that player has shown that they are out of that poor form stretch, unless, like I said, one of the reasons I listed, but usually I wait until they show that they aren't in that poor form or that team is getting better.
Josh, Meg?
For me, it's going to be what is everyone else doing? I'm Chaco over here, so I'm going to listen to everybody else tell me whether I should be taking a chance that his form's going to get better or waiting on him. Yeah, I'll stick with Chalk. Let Chalk tell me what to do. I'm boring.
Valid strategy.
As far as poor form, I do a lot of the whole matchup based. If the reason why the player's form might be poor is because they are missing key players in that add to that player's ability, and those players are coming back, then I might be like, okay, well, maybe I'll throw this player on the bench, and especially if they're betting against a weak opponent, and try to see if that'll give me an edge. But for the most part, I guess it's matchup for me, and it's definitely a roll the dice on the bench. I don't start them outright.
Blaine?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. I kind of answered this already, but team form is a big one for me. If you want to identify why a player is in poor form, and I think the first place you need to look is how is their team performing as a whole. If you've got a good player on a hot team that's slumping a little bit, maybe you need to look at somebody else from that team. Or maybe you find that weak and you go, okay, this matchup works for them. I think this is a chance to get back on track, and hope that everybody else is kind of ignoring that player because of his current form and try to jump the gun a little bit and get in there before everybody else gets back on him. And then, but when I really find it's easier to determine when to get off of a player because of team form. When Espinoza for San Jose stopped doing as much, the team stopped looking as good. Everything was kind of riding on him, and he was not getting a ton of support. And I think we identified that shortly after, that the team goes the way he goes, so everything's riding on him. He's not getting a lot of support. So while he was playing really well, he was fun to grab, but the rest of the team was not providing that for him. And so he's a guy that's there, unlike Heel, who is always providing for the team, usually in pretty good form. It's just what's his ceiling going to look like depending on how his team is doing around him. And we had a point this year where we were off of him because nobody could score for him. He could set up a ton of beautiful balls, but nobody was finishing them, and it just really hurt his ceiling. So it's kind of identifying why the form is bad, and then correcting from there. As soon as Heel's teammates started doing more, his value went right back up where we expected it to be. So I tend to follow teams more than players when it comes to that. And when you see a team doing really well, you go identify the players that are doing well for that team. Now, there are always exceptions, and one of the big things that you want to be the guy to do is get in first before everybody realizes that the form is going to switch. I think Polito's a great example from this year. He came in strong. If you saw him hit that first goal and then immediately go, okay, he's back, the team looks really dangerous, you got a lot of points. If you're like, is he back or not? If you waffled a little bit on that, you missed out on a lot of points for every week you didn't have him. It's just, that's the way it goes. So you got to kind of identify why form changes all of a sudden. And if you can accurately identify that, I think you've got a lot more going for you. And that's why I put so much in form and team form across the board. That's kind of been a theme for me for this whole show. It's just, I think the way the team goes, it's a team sport. If the team's playing well, the players are going to do well. And the ones that you expect to get the points generally get those points.
Yeah, I think Pooch is a good example too. Christian mentioned that in chat. That's a good one of someone who changed. So the first thing for me when trying to decide is just, and maybe this is the obvious one, but results. I mean, the teams that aren't getting the wins, that aren't getting those points, like I'm going to be automatically, that's what I'm looking for when I'm doing my first look of like, oh, Colorado's been struggling. Oh, Miami's been struggling. Oh, Montreal's been struggling at various times of the season. This is not current state. I can just see the results that they're not producing. It's like, that's a team I want to bet against at times. Injuries and call-ups, that's absolutely what we're looking at to see who's there, who's not there. Megan touched on some of that stuff of what's going on there. Do I want to bet against a starting keeper's gone? Do I want to bet against the backup keeper? A starting keeper and key defensive unit players have been called up. Are you missing your playmaker? Like things like that are things you bet against for defenses or are the offenses. Fixture congestion. We saw that so much at the beginning of this season, especially with Seattle and some of these teams that are playing in their domestic tournaments. Of you just have so much, and I mean LA got hit with that recently, LAFC. That there's just so much stuff going on. Players are worn out there, and it's just be like betting against them or just not picking them. For the individual player, I tend to be more conservative, especially when players are coming into the league or others, and I usually want to see a couple of games of results before I'm going to be like feel really good about somebody. I'd be more likely to add a player as a bench differential after one good result. I did that with Polito and it paid off. But for actually putting him in the field, I tend to want a couple of games of results, me personally, not a hard and fast rule. We've also talked about coaching changes before. That's a double-edged sword because Chicago's done great with a coaching change. Other teams have not done so well with coaching changes. And so it's something to keep in mind, but not always going to give you a solid yes or no. We've mentioned a couple of times as well, when I'm betting against, or teams that are on long road stretches tend to be people I may target. That's a lot of travel, can be a lot of fatigue depending on what's going on, and just not having that home field advantage can definitely impact the team's performance. And the last one I'm going to mention, I think fits here best, is players who are in formations with too many options. And I think New England's forwards have been a pretty good example of that this year. Houston's forwards of the past have been a good example when the team, this may be a team doing well, but the points are just being spread around so much that that's not what I'm interested in, because you're either going to have to double up on some of those positions, which is going to be eating into your formation, which I guess I'll add. I tend to be a guy who likes to have some diversity with my team. Or you're going to have to take a guess as to which forward might start, which forward might be getting those points. It's a little bit easier if you're just waiting to see who is in the starting lineup, but if players are starting 2 or 3 guys that are all viable targets for those points, that's stuff that I tend to be like, I don't want to fool with that. I want to look at something else and go there. So that's sort of what I look at when I'm trying to figure out who to bet against, who might be hot garbage, who might be just worth it right there. I think there might have been one more question I saw in chat, but I can't. Let's see here. Oh, this is specifically for you, Josh, since you're all about chalk. Anybody else, of course, can chime in afterwards, but it's specific for you, Josh. How do you determine bad chalk from good chalk?
Good question. It's hard because there's a lot of bad chalk. I think fixture does help. You can kind of lean one way or another, but I don't know really, because I just go with my gut when it comes to chalk. As far as like if there's 7 midfielders that I want, I'm going to go with my gut on which 5 to start. But I don't know how to really determine which one's going to be bad chalk, unless it's just other than fixture. Star defense, I don't want to play a really good midfielder against them if they're still, even if they're chalk. But I will do it if I have to.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
I think it comes back to form. We saw Almada become bad chalk at a couple of times this year. Atlanta stopped looking as good. They were missing a couple of players. Their defense got a little shaky. And he was either having to track back and do a little bit more, or they were under more pressure, so he got less of the ball. His numbers dropped off a little bit. Honestly, it's kind of that. I think the community, when we start talking about chalk, because chalk's a community thing, I think the community has a set view of how they look at a player, and we kind of make blind spots for ourselves as a community. We expected Espinoza to keep that form going for San Jose, and it took a few weeks before people go, oh, is he still that guy? Well, we make some guys chalk because we like the matchup, we like the player, he's done so well for us in the past.
Yeah.
And we hold on to him a little bit too long, or we just assume, oh, they're a great player, they're going to do it, and we don't really look at the team form and the total situation. So if you've got a bad feeling about a team or a player or a matchup, and you see the community starting to make one of those key components chalky, that's when you want to kind of steer away. Trust your gut on a lot of that. If you feel like a team is not doing well, not performing, not giving you what you want, and then the community starts pushing them, that's turn tail and run. I've done it more and more.
And I will say, I think FOMO plays into this some as well. That and Mukhtar's been a good example of where we've said often at the show, he's just struggled on the road, and that there's data there that supports some of that, but he's not been the fantastic road player. But if you're looking at to fill a 5th midfielder spot, or if their team's on bye and you're just trying to get your team filled out, you might be like, he's done stuff in the past, and so other people are going to have him. Do I want to miss out on him maybe doing well? Like there could be a FOMO element to it as well. Were you going to say something, Meg?
Yeah, I was typing. As far as like bad chalk, my take on that whole thing is if it's a player that I have a bad feeling about, but if I don't have that player and that player hits and it's going to hurt me, I will try to finagle throwing that player on the bench just so he's in my lineup. And then if he busts like I think he's going to, no harm. But if he booms, then I'm not harmed either because that player can sub in. Now, this doesn't always work if it depends on like how the matchups line out and when that team is playing and whatnot. But kind of play, a little bit of a safety net, so to speak. But that's that.
Yeah, I would just tag along with Meg's point. I think it was Christian a few times in the Discord has said, so if I give Christian credit when he doesn't deserve it, he gets credit, I guess. I don't know. Congrats, Christian. Where picking a differential, I know we're talking about chalk, but picking a differential, it's important when you pick someone that's away from the main group think, is that person is going to be good enough to make it worth potentially losing points on everyone else too. You have to be like that convinced. So you can't just like pick someone you're excited about, which I have done many times, and lost ground on a lot of people because the chalk pick ended up being better. So it's like a double whammy a little bit. But at the same time, like when I try to differentiate bad chalk, it's when I can logically convince myself not to pick that person, even if I start having FOMO. So if I make my lineup, I look, and if Mukhtar's on the road, but DC is leaky right now, so maybe we should pick Mukhtar, but it's Mukhtar on the road is bad. Mukhtar on the road is bad. Maybe I'll put him on my bench, and that's when I use a mid spot on my bench. I have no problem doing that at those points. But it's when I can convince myself that it's a bad idea, or if Almeida's at Red Bulls, they'd lock down 10s pretty well, at least were it towards the beginning of the season. I'll put him on my bench just in case, maybe, or I'll fade him entirely because I can convince myself. Versus, I'm not great about gut feelings sometimes. A lot of people have great gut feelings, so props to those who do. But it's really if I can convince myself, not even just going down a rabbit hole, but like actually, and I can tell that my logic makes sense, even if it's wrong in the end, or if the pick ends up being a good one. That's when I can start moving my way away from group thought. And nothing against the Discord chat. Like it's awesome. It's great. And it's really helpful. But if I can start to see it divulge away from logic sometimes, which we all do. So again, not to fault anyone in chat. That's when I start to rear away a little bit, consider that bad chalk.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me because I know oftentimes I mention on the show of like, yeah, I don't have this guy. I get why you'd want him, but I'm just not sure. That's where it starts to be that, like, I can see the argument. I don't know. So, no, that's excellent. Well, go ahead.
I would say identifying bad chalk is one of the hardest skills that you can develop in this.
Sure,
game.
Absolutely.
Chalk is chalk for a reason. And you're now differentiating, like, okay, we can see Mukhtar on the road versus a good defense is an easy one to not become chalk. Like, that makes sense. But when Mukhtar's playing against one of the worst defenses in the league, it's on the road. Like, now you're having to choose, like, you're always picking guys against that defense. That defense is always giving up goals. How do you know when to avoid a guy like Mukhtar? And that is an incredibly hard skill to develop. That's why I say go with your gut. But chalk is chalk for a reason. And if you can't really justify getting away from a guy, you may not want to, because the majority of the community is going to be looking at that guy. Okay, you may eat a 3, but the vast majority of other players are going to eat that same 3 you did, so you're not really losing ground. You're just getting the opportunity to try to gain something. If you go pick up a 5 instead of the 3, you're a couple points ahead. Great. But if Mukhtar does his 13 like he can, okay, now you're down a few points again. So it's go with chalk unless you can really talk your way out of it.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys coming for the show. I appreciate the comments in the chat that's been going on as we've had this, and I appreciate everyone who submitted some questions from the Discord community before the show started. I hope you found some valuable information, some insights, or at least some entertaining conversation from the chat tonight. We will end as we do every week with plugs. So we'll start out, Meg, with your double crew right there. What do you got?
I got no plugs, honestly. This community is so great. I know that's what everyone always says when they come on here, but it really is. So I guess I could plug her because, she didn't even tell me that I was going to be on this thing until
Love the reaction.
like an hour before it was happening. So I had to scramble with some notes, and I still butchered my notes too. So
No, I love that.
awesome.
I love that she was like, I can bring Josh to it, and I was like, sure, yeah, let's do it. Meg.
I'll go with our Discord community as well. They're incredible. I've made some really good friends, and I learn something new about this game and this platform every week. So I enjoy it.
Matt.
It's not much of a plug, but watch the Women's World Cup. Timing's weird because it's on Australia, New Zealand, but it's been a great tournament so far, really entertaining. And yeah, support the women's national team as well. They're great.
Blaine.
Not much from me. There's just been a lot of craziness on my end, and that's why I've been gone. I'm glad to be back.
Excellent. Well, yes, I can't plug enough the amazing MLS Fantasy Discord community that we have here at the Fantasy Boss Discord community, where all of you all are fantastic contributors to the community. Everyone who's joining us in chat is also great contributors to just this community as well. And it's just great. It's been amazing just to see the evolution of things. As I was looking at options, I was kind of looking over the history of the show, and it's just wild from where things started years ago to where we are now. So definitely big hats off to you, but also to our patrons as well. I know we always mention you at the top of the show, but I'll make sure you get mentioned at the end of the show as well, that you guys do help financially with the things that we need to keep the lights on. Literally keep the lights on, and the fees paid to have access to the content that we have, and it's because you guys are willing to do that and have value here. That means a lot to me, and so thank you so much for all of that. But it's great, and we will also plug Ashley, who is off on vacation and having a fantastic time, and we are very happy for her and hope she is enjoying it, and look forward for her return when we talk about which I guess next week we will be talking about the fantasy impacts of Messi. I know you may have been your fill of Messi, but this is going to be a fantasy focused conversation about his impacts on his team and on your teams and on the leagues and the lineups going forward. So we will see who we have for that. RIP the old Chatango chat. Yes, it was a great place. But we may have Black and Red on for that one himself. I know Blaine and Ashley, I believe, should be here, so that should be some good conversation if you want to tune in for that. But as always, good luck.